The story I'm going to tell you today starts 15 years, 10 months, and 16 days ago and takes us back to 3 a.m. on Tuesday, September 30th of 2008 to a place called New Delhi, India. The story I'm going to tell you today starts 15 years, 10 months, and 16 days ago and takes us back to 3 a.m. on Tuesday, September 30th of 2008 to a place called New Delhi, India. That's when a 25-year-old journalist named Soumya was driving back home in the wee hours of the morning from her office in central Delhi's Jhandewalan towards the south to her home in Vasant Kunj. Before she started her drive, just as a habit, she called up her father at 3:17 a.m. to let him know that she will begin her commute soon and at this point of the morning, it should not have taken her more than 30 minutes to drive home. But little did her father know that this would be the last time he would ever speak to her. Less than 30 minutes later, Soumya's bullet-ridden body was found by a restaurant worker who was cycling back home. He found her car at the Nelson Mandela Marg. Her car had veered off to the side and she was slumped towards the right side. At this point, Soumya was merely 10 minutes away from her house. The restaurant worker quickly called someone for assistance, and that's when the police showed up. As the police came, they of course tried to rush her to the nearest hospital, which was the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, but unfortunately, Soumya was declared dead on arrival. The next few days and the next few months of 2008 were abuzz about the death of Soumya because she was a journalist. But the police had absolutely no idea who had killed Soumya. But before we go any further, who was Soumya Vishwanathan? Soumya Vishwanathan was born to her parents M.K. Vishwanathan, who was a government officer, and her mother Madhvi Vishwanathan, who was a lecturer in the year 1982. Soumya means the gentle one, someone who's very kind. Soumya spent her entire life. Soumya was born and raised in New Delhi, and when it came to going to university, Soumya took the entrance exam for the All India Institute of Mass Communications, which is a very sought after university, and she was fortunate enough to clear the entrance exam, and she was placed in the Odisha campus of the Indian Institute of Mass Communications, where she graduated with flying colors in the year 2003. The minute she graduated from there, she made her way back to New Delhi and started working in many up-and-coming news channels, which were a new thing back in the early 2000s. Now, Didi, do you remember anything about the early 2000s and do you remember anything about the news channels at that time?
What I recall about this time is NDTV, Aaj Tak, Z News were 24 hours news channels.
Right, so just like Didi said, these were completely up and coming news channels at that time, and there was a mushrooming of all these kinds of channels. And Soumya was working as a news segment producer for these channels.
I have a theory. She was a journalist and she was killed by someone who she might be covering in a story, like a politician maybe.
Okay, well, I would say hold that thought and let me tell you about the other victim of this crime. So, the other victim of this crime was a woman called Jigisha Ghosh, and on March 18th of 2009, which was approximately 6 months after Soumya's death, Jigisha, who was a resident also of the Vasant Kunj area, which is very, very close to where Soumya lived, Jigisha was coming back home. And Jigisha was a 28-year-old woman who was working as an operations manager of Hewitt Association, and her company is in Noida. Now, for all those who are not familiar with the metropolitan area of New Delhi, this actually covers areas like Gurugram, it covers areas like Noida, So she was coming back from her office, which was in Noida, towards Delhi, towards Vasant Kunj. Now, just like any hardworking woman of her age, worked really hard and climbed up the corporate ladder. And on this particular day, the reason she was returning back home at 4 a.m. was because was making a presentation for a US based company, and she was basically trying to work with the US timings. That's the reason why she was returning late towards her home. But her parents were not really worried because her own cab, like the office cab, was supposed to drop her off at home. Just like Soumya had called up her parents before she started her commute, Jigisha too informed her parents that she would soon be sitting in the cab and she would be home very soon. And she basically asked her mom, "Can you please make me some breakfast? I'll be home in an hour or so and I will eat at that time." Now, unlike some apartments where those are gated apartments, Jigisha's apartment was not gated, and very soon after speaking to her parents, she was dropped off. Now, as she was being dropped off, just like 2 or 3 minutes before that, a person who worked in her office actually called her up, and she took that call on her cell phone. And she started speaking to that person, and as she was dropped off, she was still speaking to that person. Now, Didi, just in case you remember anything about phone networks back in 2008, you and I at that time used to have one of those Nokia phones, the ones which resembled a brick more than a phone. Would you like to say anything about that?
See, all I remember is internet or connectivity in general was very poor. So once you would enter your buildings, it would be impossible to speak, freely and properly to a person. So I suppose that's why she was standing there and she continued talking.
Right. You are speculating exactly the right way. That was the only reason she was still standing downstairs and speaking to someone in her office. She was actually helping someone through a particular problem. And that's when her parents kept waiting for her, and she never came up. And her parents were under the impression that she was going to soon walk up anytime. They kept waiting, but she never made it upstairs. Her parents then quickly got in touch with all her co workers. They called up the driver of the cab. They called up everyone who was in the cab, and they came to know that she had been dropped off, but for some reason she was not coming upstairs. So her parents went downstairs. They kept looking for her everywhere. They couldn't find her. Now, just as a side note, both Soumya and Jigisha they both were like the only child of both the parents. That's when Jigisha's mom, her name is Sabita Ghosh, she basically convinced the father that both of them need to rush to the nearest police station and they should go and file an FIR that their daughter is missing. So remember, they were expecting that their daughter would come home by around 4:35 a.m. But because she had not arrived by 7:38 a.m., they rushed to the nearest police station and they tried. Both Jagannath Ghosh and Jigisha's mom, that was Sabita Ghosh, both ran to the police station and they tried to file an FIR. Now, how do you think this went, the whole filing of the FIR? What do you think?
Okay, I think the police would have bluntly refused to file an FIR. Too early for parents to be worrying, and the girl would be back home soon, or she'll be like coming back within a few hours. So it was nothing.
Okay, so you're right there. And as a matter of fact, the police just went a step further. They didn't say anything like, your daughter will be back home. The police, of course, somehow meant to suggest to Sabita Ghosh and Jagannath Ghosh that their daughter had quote unquote eloped. Now, I don't know where the police officers learned this, but if you're a fan of true crime, I'm pretty sure that if you ever listen to any true crime story from any country, any culture, for some reason, all police officers say the same thing. So, I don't know where they're learning this, but they're learning this somewhere. So, they shirked responsibility and they refused to file an FIR, which of course drove her parents crazy. Sabita, which was again Jigisha's mom, she had some relative who knew someone, and that person somehow knew the Speaker of the Parliament, a man called Somnath Chatterjee. Now, Somnath Chatterjee is a very well known name all over India because at this point in the year 2009, he was the Speaker of the Lok Sabha of India. So it took a person of that caliber to convince the Delhi police that they should file an FIR in Jigisha's case. He intervened and then an FIR was actually filed. After filing the FIR, the police started looking for Jigisha, and it had already almost been 48 hours when the police was looking around, the relatives were looking around, and at this point, the police made a gruesome discovery. That's when they found a female body near the Surajkund Faridabad area. They found Jigisha's body, which was discarded in some bushes, and later on the same day, an autopsy was conducted which revealed that Jigisha had been strangled to death. However, I should clarify that in some newspaper reports, it says that Jigisha was shot to death. These are contradictory pieces of information. Maybe she was, both the things were done to her. I have not been able to clarify that. As you can see, at this point, Soumya was killed in 2008 and Jigisha was killed in 2009. So, as you can imagine, everybody in Delhi was extremely scared because these were women just going about their daily life, just going to work and heading back home. So, there was an air of terror all over Delhi in 2008 and 2009. Now, just like in the case of Soumya Vishwanathan, even Jigisha Ghosh's parents could not find any answers from the police, and they couldn't figure out who could have possibly done this to their daughter, who would have killed their daughter in this way. So, interestingly enough, Jigisha Ghosh's parents took on the detective work in their own hands, and they started investigating her death. Sabita Ghosh, who was Jigisha's mom, she logged into her daughter's online banking system, and she could see that shortly after her death, money had been withdrawn from Jigisha's account. After logging into the bank accounts, she quickly realized that about 1.5 lakh rupees had gone missing and had been withdrawn from her account with the help of her debit card. Now, 1.5 lakh rupees is almost the equivalent of 15 or $1,600 depending on what the conversion rate is. After they realized this about their daughter's debit card and debit account, they walked into the bank headquarters and they begged the bank manager to help them out. They of course told the bank manager the position that they were in, and the bank manager did pinpoint that all this money had been spent in a particular shop in an area called Sarojini Nagar, which is also in the South Delhi area of New Delhi. And next, Jigisha's parents walked into that particular shop which the bank manager had pinpointed, and they realized that this particular shop basically sold luxury products like different kinds of watches, different sneakers, expensive hats, things like that. Then they asked the shopkeeper, they basically begged the shopkeeper to look through the debit card receipt. And the second Jigisha's mom laid eyes on that credit card receipt, she basically realized that there was no way possible that her daughter would have signed it, because she was very familiar with her daughter's handwriting. And the signature was done vertically. However, her daughter would always, of course, sign like all of us. We would all sign horizontally usually. Next, the shopkeeper even gave the parents some sort of a description. And what's really interesting is that the shop actually had a CCTV camera back in 2009 as well, and they could see, the shopkeeper was able to see what these people looked like, and he did inform Jigisha's parents that there was no woman who was accompanying these men when they were shopping. The minute Jigisha's parents heard that and they knew that there was CCTV footage, they rushed back to the police station and they informed the police about all this. The police then, thankfully in this case, did not take things lying down, and they rushed to the shop and they took the CCTV footage in their own hands, and they zeroed in on something really interesting. They could see that one of the men that they could see on that day, who was buying these sneakers and watches and all these expensive products, had a police radio in his hands, which is the kind of equipment that most of us will never have access to. It's usually only found, or people of the law enforcement. They could also see that the same guy was wearing like a very distinct cap, something quite expensive. And they could also see that these supposed kidnappers, those people basically were, they could see that one of these guys was really well built and quite macho. He was a buff guy. And they did something quite interesting, which, by the way, for any police force, I mean, I just found this really interesting, that they zeroed in on the fact that nobody would be making this kind of body at home. This person would have to go to some sort of a gym to make that kind of body. And they could also see that there was a distinct tattoo on the left hand side of this person, the left's arm of this person. So what they did next is, within the police circles and their informants, they tried to figure out who matched the description of this person who would be going to gyms in the southern Delhi area. While the police was still looking, somehow they came to know that there's a person who matches this description, and this guy calls himself Poppy, Poppy, as in like the pea seeds. But his real name was Baljit Malik. The gym that this person usually frequented was in the Masoodpur village area, which is near Vasant Kunj in South Delhi. And this was a significant breakthrough thanks to the informants. What the police did next was they even figured out one more thing, that this guy called Baljit always hung out with two specific men, and then somebody even gave them the description of their Hyundai car, which was a Hyundai Santro. And then through the informants, they even came to know that this person usually is seen in a car which the number plate was HR18C 3409. Next, the police barricaded a particular traffic point in Delhi, and then they tried looking for this car, and they were lucky enough that they actually found this car. And that's when they found these three people inside the same car. A guy called Baljit, a guy called Amit Shukla, and another guy called Ravi Kapoor. Once the police stopped this car, they found a lot of material possessions which actually belonged to Jigisha. And they also found a gun, which was a country style made handgun. So it was, in Hindi, it's called a Desi Katta. Once the police took these people to the police station, they figured out that all these men had a really wrong rap sheet. And one of these people had been apprehended time and time again because he would try to pass himself off as a police officer, a doctor, a judge, so on and so forth. So he was basically stealing these people's identity, and he had a very long history of pretending to be a person in authority. When the police started talking to these three people, these three suspects, one of them quite quickly told the police that the other guy had not only heard Jigisha, but he said something quite interesting. He said that these two men had also killed Soumya Vishwanathan, which was a complete shock to the police. They were not expecting that at all. Once one of these men confessed to this, that's when one of the suspects told the police what had actually happened on the night of 30th of September of 2008 when Soumya was killed. Soumya was driving on the road which was completely empty because it was the wee hours of the morning. Soumya was behind the car of Baljit, Poppy, and all these other three men. The road was empty, and of course Soumya, just like anyone else, tried to overtake these men because they were driving so slowly. The second Soumya did that, one of these three men, or maybe all three of them, I'm not sure, that's how the story goes, got so agitated that she was taking them over, that he shit out of the car, and he was constantly telling Soumya to stop the car. Now, as a lady who was driving at 3 o'clock in the morning, what do you think her reaction?
She must be very scared because I really understand this road rage must have scared her.
Right. So what she did next, just like anyone else, as a female driving in Delhi, she of course refused to stop the car. She refused to roll down her window, and she kept driving, and she actually became a little faster because she was trying to get away from these three maniacs. That's when one of them took out this handmade pistol that he had, and he shot her through the glass. The minute she was shot, it went through her temple, and she died on the spot. As a matter of fact, one of the suspects even told the police later, when he was confessing to this whole thing, that they did not realize that she had died immediately. So they got scared and they left the scene quickly. And once they returned about 10 minutes later, by that time the police and the restaurant worker who had found her body was already there. So they rushed out of that place because they knew that they might get caught. Now, of course, the next question that the police asked these three people was, how on earth were they able to kidnap Jigisha? Because right now they were just telling the police how they got Soumya. Now, this is how they got Jigisha. Jigisha, as you remember, was downstairs when she was dropped, and she was speaking on the phone. Now, these three men were just passing by and they saw that a woman was basically standing underneath her building and she was speaking on the phone. So, one of these men took a little piece of paper and then they stopped the car near Jigisha Ghosh and they asked her, Madam, could you help us with this address? And out of the goodness of her heart, Jigisha was such a nice person that she inched closer to the car just to look at the address, and that's when they pulled her into the car, they robbed her, they drove her around Delhi for an entire day, and later on they smothered and killed her. Now one of the most disturbing things about this entire case is that these shameless men actually told the police something truly heartbreaking. When they were about to kill Jigisha, she said, if you kill me, this will kill my mother automatically. However, despite these pleas, they did not let her live, and all three of them killed her and they discarded her body in the Suraj Kund Faridabad road. Now, if you recall, Soumya was killed in 2008 and Jigisha was killed in 2009, but it was as recent as November 26th of 2023 when these three men, Ravi Kapoor, Amit Shukla, and Poppy Malik, and another two guys, one guy called Ajay Kumar and another guy called Ajay Seth, were finally put into judicial custody forever. They were in the jail in the interim. Starting in 2010, they were put into jail. However, in 2023, finally it was declared that these people will never get out of the judicial system. Of course, they were charged with the murder of these two women. Very interestingly, they were also charged under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code, which under Section 3.1 is actually called the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, and that's because these men were basically working as a crime syndicate. However, despite being charged with all these things, since 2009 till 2023, these people have actually made Jigisha's parents' lives an absolute nightmare.
Weren't these guys behind bars?
Well, they were behind bars, and you're absolutely right. However, how they made specifically Jigisha's parents, their lives a living nightmare is somehow they got hold of every single phone number that Jigisha's parents have ever had and kept calling them constantly. They somehow even got to know Jigisha's parents' address. So these poor parents had been chased out of their own house and they were living in different rented locations all around Delhi. Well, we don't really know whether it's these five men who were calling up, but we can definitely, I mean, of course, from the jail system, at least we can hope that these people were not themselves calling up Jigisha's parents. However, I'm sure these people have well-wishers and families, and somebody out of that circle kept calling Jigisha's parents. They even showed up at Jigisha's parents' house. So these poor people who already were in a financially terrible situation, because Jigisha was actually the working member of the family, and these people had to move from their house and go to different rented locations around Delhi. Now, interestingly enough, of course, they had evidence that corroborated that they had killed Jigisha, because they found a lot of things inside the car when they arrested these people. However, the only thing connecting these men with Soumya's murder was that they had actually confessed that they had killed Soumya, right? So as you can imagine, the agony that Soumya's parents were going through was completely different from what Jigisha's parents were going through. So in Soumya's parents' case, it was the fact that these people had confessed. So Soumya's parents were hoping that these men would be charged with her murder as well. Actually, quite early on in the case, the main suspects in the case were given the death penalty, which, of course, the minute someone's given the death penalty, they go to a higher court, and they always request that their death penalty be changed into life imprisonment. So in the year 2023, all the death sentences were basically commuted to life, and these people would be in prison forever, which are the three main suspects.
So they will be in prison exactly the same way as they have put both these sets of parents in prison.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Just like Soumya's parents will never get over her death, neither will Jigisha's parents get over her death. So, in fact, all these people are sentenced together.
Yeah, absolutely right. So let me tell you something. I don't know how to put it, but quite heart wrenching. Which is in November of 2023, after the High Court confirmed that these three men will be in jail for the rest of their lives. The minute that was declared, 2 weeks after that, Soumya's father, M.K. Vishwanathan, passed away. I don't know if these women knew each other in real life or not. They were living in almost the same vicinity. I'm not sure if they ever met in real life or not, but in their death, they've been. So, in the case of Soumya Vishwanathan and Jigisha Ghosh, all these four offenders, all these four perpetrators can be understood through a few criminological theories. Let me at least try to explain it through one lens, which is called social learning theory, which explains that any kind of criminal behavior is actually learned through interactions with others and from one's own environment. So these four men, by the way, I hope Didi you remember that in the story, all four of them were caught in the same car. They were constantly hanging out together. They were basically like a crime syndicate, right? So this theory basically builds on the premise that people learn not only through their own experience but also by observing others. And if you remember, in this particular case, there was this man called Poppy, right? So this theory basically builds on the premise that people learn not only through their own experience but also by observing others. And if you remember, in this particular case, there was this man called Poppy, who was pretending to be a judge. He was pretending to be a police officer. He was even pretending to be a doctor at one point. So basically, a person like this who's constantly pretending to be a certain thing, however, he's not getting any reaction out of it. He's not being checked in that behavior. So even men around him have learned that it's okay to lie, and it's okay to do these horrible crimes because you will always get away. So that's basically how we can understand the behavior of these four perpetrators through the social learning theory. Another one that I do think that actually applies here is something which is called differential association, where we basically learn values, attitudes, techniques, and even motives of criminal behavior with our interaction with our peers. So with these four people, they were constantly hanging out together. They were learning criminal behavior from each other, and they were just conforming to what the group dynamic was. In a dynamic like that, one person cannot be a morally upright human being. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that group mentality corrupts you.
Yeah.
They have learned that one of their cons have paid off, so why not try another one? Move on.
Right. And I think psychologically, in Soumya's case, she was in her car. She died on the spot because they shot her through the glass. However, in Jigisha's case,
In Jigisha's case, I really, really, really wish she would have said no. She would not have helped. That was really sad.
yeah, but then we're definitely not blaming the victim, but I think the way we are brought up to help people, even if it's 4 o'clock in the morning, even if it's 7 o'clock at night, whatever time it is, we don't think of our comfort. We are all constantly thinking of sort of, especially as girls, parents give equal good moral values to hopefully all of us. I'm sure this happens to boys as well, but we as women are sort of afraid to be perceived as being bitchy or being difficult. So yes, of course, both of us wish that Jigisha at that point would not have sort of helped these people.
And maybe she was in the comfort of her house as in vicinity, so she thought it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Especially when you're standing underneath your house, it's just underneath the staircase. There is this sense of lull and, this sense of comfort that one has in that vicinity, that, everything's going to be fine. I'm like meters away from my house.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So all in all, what can one say? It's one can only try to explain deviant behavior through criminology and through psychology, but the fact of the matter is that we should all always look out for ourselves. Don't be nice to people. I know this sounds really bad, but especially when you're in a situation when you're all alone. If you're in a group, by all means, go help other people. But especially when you're all alone, probably helping a group of men is possibly not a good idea.
I agree. I agree.
Okay, so that's our criminological and psychological analysis of what could be happening with the perpetrators and also the victims. So that's the end of today's episode. As we always say on this podcast, we can give each other way more than just our thoughts and prayers. We can give each other our collective vigilance.